Hi there, I'm Chuck Rosansky, and I am in my Pueblo Treasures Museum. Now, you may think that's a little ostentatious to say that I have a museum rather than just a collection of Pueblo pottery, but actually I have over 15,000 pieces here in what's 3 or 4 rooms, and it's the largest collection of Pueblo pottery to be found anywhere in the world. So this little series of reels that I'm going to start doing is going to be giving kind of an idea of what I have, why I have it, a little bit of philosophy. There are some other reels that I have up on YouTube, which are longer and a little bit older. They're from before, when I bought another 3,000 or 4,000 pieces and added them to the collection. But the kinds of things that I've been looking for lately are things that are a little bit more noteworthy, such as this insane Margaret Tafoya wedding vase. Now, Margaret Tafoya and her mother, Sara, Fina, were considered to be the best potters at Santa Clara, Pueblo, for the better part of a century, starting in the 1890s and going all the way through. Margaret Tafoya died, oh my God, year 2000, I think. So it's 110 years. So I'm going to set this vase down because it's actually quite heavy and it weighs a lot. And let you look here. This is the earliest kinds of Santa Clara pottery. And this is called a Pahogi polychrome, which has it's kind of hard to call it a polychrome because it's really a black on, or it's actually a gray on black. If you take a look at it here, this came out of the Denver Art Museum. They deaccessioned it because they deemed it as not being purty enough for their displays. Well, I gladly purchased it and got it. These are micaceous jars. Mica clay comes from up in the Taos area, up north of where Santa Clara, Pueblo is. Santa Clara is north of Santa Fe by about 20 miles. Taos is another 45 miles north of where Santa Clara is. And up there where the Taos Indians live and the Picayures Indians live, they have clays that are very heavy in mica, very sparkly. And so the Indians from the Espanola area, which would include Santa Clara, San Ildefonso, Okeowenge, Nambe, Powake, and Tasuke, those are your Tewa Pueblos, and they would go up to the Taos area. They would use wagons, and they would haul pottery up there because there were some dealers up there that had trading posts, and they would sell their pottery up there in the Taos area, but then they would also trade for micaceous clays, and then they would do these beautiful micaceous pots. A lot of times, though, the pots that they made out of the micaceous clay were cooking pots, because the micaceous clay is supposed to have this wonderful ability to retain heat, and it's particularly good for cooking beans. But in this instance, they made decorative elements on them. I'm 90% sure that this one was made by Margaret's mother, Margaret Tafoya's mother, Sara Fina Tafoya. It's got what's called a crenellated rim, which is like a pie crust rim. And then she did these little foxes or bear cubs. I mean, there's different interpretations as to what they are. But they're fairly common on her pottery. The rest of these jars that are here are all by Sara Fina Tafoya, and they show a little bit of her genius, because when she first started selling in the 1890s, it was still the Victorian era, and at that time they were doing things that were ornate. But then the craftsmen, the arts and crafts movement began And as people started buying more things like stickly furniture with its really straight and angular lines and building houses in the craftsman style, the ornateness went away. It went more to that kind of undecorated style. So you have a really early Serafina here, and then you still have the crenellation in the rim here, but you no longer have these extrusions or these indentations. You just have what's called a rainbow rim. This is sort of the peak of Serafina's work. This is a double rainbow jar, and these are called raindrop rims. There's a lot of different talk about what the very small indentations were for. I'm not going to go into that. But suffice it to say that these are called raindrop rims. Then as you go along, notice how stark this becomes relative, especially to this first jar that was made in the 1890s. This was probably made around 1925. And then the final iteration of what she was doing as she got towards the end of her life, she was doing these where they still had these beautiful high raised necks and these flaring rims, but you notice there's no decoration whatsoever, and there's just the single angular shoulder line here, but still the form is almost perfect. If you take a look, this pot gives a better idea of what most people at Santa Clara were doing, because it's not unusual at all, since they fire these pots in their backyards using just cottonwood bark or split cottonwood, that they warp when they're firing them. And so for Serafina to have turned out these absolutely symmetrical jars is the miracle of the work that she was doing. And she was quite a taskmaster. She was very hard on little Margaret Tafoya when she was a child. And so Margaret would go to the Santa Clara Day School, which is sort of like the elementary school. And across the street from the Santa Clara Elementary School was the home of her older sister, Tomasita. And Tomasita, I can show you some of the pieces up here on this top shelf. These are pieces by Tomasita Tafoya, who was Margaret Tafoya's older sister. Unfortunately, Tomasita passed away in the Spanish flu of 1919. She never signed any of her pots, by the way. You can tell her pots, if you've seen enough, by their very high and symmetrical necks that she did. It was sort of her trademark. But you don't, these pieces come out from old collections very, very seldom. I'm showing you a whole bunch of them here, but if you were to go to all the museums in America put together, first off, I doubt if you'd find anybody who knew who Tomasita was. And second of all, they don't have any of those. They're here. And that's one of the things, if you come to visit the Pueblo Treasures Museum, I can show you stuff that you're not going to see anywhere else. And that includes at the Pueblo. So they don't have any of this pottery. There are very, very little. And so what I've done is to gather together over a period of 30 years some really cool historic pieces, and then figured out who made them, even if they're unsigned. All of these Serafinas, just to give you a case in point, all of these are unsigned. So it's conceivable that one of them was made by another potter at Santa Clara. But like I said, I've been doing this for 30 years, and Serafina Tafoya and her work are a particular passion of mine. So that's why this is sort of my specialty. Now, if we go over here, one of my other real specialties is what are called cornmeal boxes. Well, I guess I can't open this one up because I've got the one jar here. But these cornmeal boxes, I think you can get a pretty good view of them even with the glass. These are made by Serafina or by Margaret, And these little boxes are actually rather hard to make because it's hard to keep the sides completely vertical. They typically have to let the clay dry for upwards of 2 months before they fire them, or else they end up getting warping in the actual base of them, or the little shrink and it won't quite fit. There's just all sorts of idiosyncrasies. But just to give you an idea of the scarcity, with the Fina Tafoya, she was illiterate. She could not read or write, at least English. I don't think she couldn't write at all. And so she had her son signing for her. And so Manuel Tafoya, who was also Margaret's sister and Tomasita's sister, Manuel Tafoya would work with his mom, and then he would handwrite her signature on the bottom of a very few pieces. With the boxes, there are 7 known signed Fina boxes in the world. 5 of them are here in the Pueblo Treasures Museum. Charles King down in Santa Fe and Scottsdale. Charles King has one in his private collection. And there's one that was in a Sotheby's auction about 30 years ago that is lost. We don't know where it is. So if anybody out there watching this video just happens to know where there's a signed Fina, it's 1-800-CALL Chuck. Okay, because I would be very interested in adding a 6th one into the family here. But another piece that I have here, I'm going to slide this little jar over slightly. I'll conclude today by just showing you this one piece. At Santa Clara, they have a tradition of making animal forms, which are called animalitos. But the uptown potters didn't have to do that. As far as I know, Fina Tafoya never made an animalito, and Margaret Tafoya, her daughter, made one. And this is it. And she made it for a lady in Taos. Remember I said earlier that there were trading posts in Taos. Well, there was a trading post in Taos that converted pots into lamps. And I'll show you one. Let's go down here just for a second. Here is a Margaret Tafoya pot that's been turned into a lamp. Well, I know who did that because it was done by a lady by the name of Hilda Street. And if you look in the Blair book called Margaret Tafoya, they talk about Hilda Street being one of Margaret Tafoya's best friends and converting her bowls and her jars into lamps. Well, as the story goes, and this is documented in the book, this frog was made by Margaret Tafoya as a personal gift to Hilda Street and given to her, and then it ended up with Al Anthony at Adobe Gallery, who was kind enough to sell it to me. And so this is the only known Margaret Tafoya animalito that's out there. These are the kinds of things that I have here in the Pueblo Treasure Museum. I mean, this is, I had the lady who's the director of ethnology for the Smithsonian come by the other day, and she said that the collection here exceeds theirs in a lot of genres. I don't have as many of the really fantastic, super old jars that they got when they merged with the Museum of the American Indian. But from 1930 on, the collection here in Denver, this is located in Denver on the 2nd floor of the Mile High Comics building, 4600 Jason Street. This collection is pretty damn noteworthy. It's pretty cool. I have so much more to show you, but I can't. So I'm going to do more of these reels. Chris, my videographer, God bless him, will take moments out before he picks his kids up from school and shoot some little shots for me. But you got to see a frog today that you'll never see anywhere else. You got to see some Fina cornmeal boxes, and I got that big old Margaret Tafoya wedding vase. Just so you know, Margaret Tafoya specialized in gigantic jars, and she sold a lot of them to Tony Rainier who had a trading post up in Taos. And some of her jars were as much as 3 feet across, 36 inches across. Huge pieces. And so I'm working on finding a dead person that has some of those and liberating them and bringing them here to the museum. But that's it for today. If you would like to visit the museum, my email address is Chuck Rozansky, one word, Chuck, ROZANSKI @gmail.com. I give tours by appointment. This is a private collection, and so it's not open to the public, but I gladly give tours. But leave yourself a couple hours, because first of all, there's 16,000 or 15,000 pieces to look at. And second, I talk a mile a minute, and and I have a lot of knowledge, and I'll share it with you, probably more than you want. So that's it for today. I'll try and do another real soon. Thanks.